these tapes.
Oh, very good.
And he said, don't start right away. Wait at least 30 seconds or 20 seconds.
What kind of work does he do?
He's a documentary filmmaker.
Wow.
He does a lot of editing,
Wow.
and a lot of shooting. And he
Wow.
always, we are together if it's convenient for him.
Okay. Does he live in Hollywood? Or does he live
No, he lives in Minnesota.
Wow.
Okay, ready to go.
Okay.
My name is...
Okay. My name is Arthur Weil, W-E-I-L, and I was born in Hanover, Germany, on September 4th, 6 a.m. in the morning, 1925. My dad came from an older German family in a small town called Steinheim in Westphalia, near Hameln, with the Pipe of Hamelin, in a little town of 2,000 that today, of course, has 12. And he was one of 4 siblings. He had a brother called Karl, and then he had 2 sisters, Anna and Ellen. Then my mother came from East Prussia, and she was an arranged wedding, I guess, one of those. My father's 31, and my mother was 20, and my grandfather's name was Adolf. That was long before Adolf Hitler. We still had those names. And he was a successful merchant in wholesale cigar, and did extremely well until the Depression. So my mother was raised in a mansion with tutors and very literate, played pianos, music, even though she was only 20 years old. A very bright lady. My father, we were in a little town, there were 4 grain merchants, and what they did is they would buy the seeds for the farmers in the area, and then they would sell the seeds and fertilizer and so on. And he was a salesman for a non-Jewish company called Gebäudewaffers out of Hanover, and so successful they gave him a chauffeur. So every Monday morning the chauffeur would come, dressed up like a chauffeur, and then he would go on this route for 5 days and come back Friday nights. So basically I never really got to know my father. Very unfortunate. He made a decent living. We had a very nice 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs or outskirts of Hanover. Now Hanover was a very modern city of 400,000. Hanover, actually, the King George I of England was also the king of Hanover, because England needed a king, and so they took him. He didn't even speak English. He was the king of Hanover. Then George II. George III was the American king. They were during the American Revolution, and he was also the king of Hanover. So it was an interesting city, relatively modern, like Germany was pretty much equal to the United States.
What percentage was Jewish?
Pardon me?
What percentage of the population in Hanover was Jewish?
The congregation started in the 12th century, and by the time of 1938, when I left, it had about 6,000 people out of 500. So like all of Germany, it was only 1%. Out of 50 million Germans, only 1% were Jewish. So Hanover was maybe 1.2%, 1%. And Jews, by this time, they didn't get their freedom until Napoleon. And then in 1830, 1840 again, after the war, 1840 revolutions. And then finally in 1860, they could own land, move any place, and get their rights. The different parts of Germany. And Westphalia was very progressive. So then many of them started to go to college in 1860. By 1920, 25, 1/4 of the doctors in Berlin were Jewish in 60, 70. Amazing, quite amazing. And because it was the Industrial Revolution, the Jews fit in. They were great bankers. They owned the department stores, the jewelry stores. They were the great merchants. But we had only one big synagogue. We had one for the Eastern Jews. And as I said, we had about between 5,000 and 6,000. And the great tragedy, what you wouldn't believe this, in 1992, my daughter and I went to Hanover. So I asked, the temple was destroyed in the Kristallnacht, and I asked, how many of the 5,000 are still left? You know what the answer was?
Not many.
Three, maybe five.
Wow.
All the others, well, they're still living outside in Israel and the United States, but not in Hanover. That was kind. And the only reason that 3 or 5 survived is because their spouses were not Jewish. See?
They call them Mishlings.
Yeah, they were Mishlings, right? Exactly. So, but the city still was rebuilt. Anyhow.
You went to school in Hanover.
Yeah, so then we were sort of upper middle class or middle class, even though we lived in an apartment. But we had a piano, we had oil paint, we have oriental carpets. Most of them were Jewish middle class. Women did not work in those days. And my mother was a bridge fiend. She played excellent bridge. And later on, when she came to the United States, she still was she always would win, one of those mathematical geniuses in bridge. Everybody has their forte. Pardon me?
Did you belong to a synagogue?
We belonged to, everybody belonged to one synagogue in Hanover. And I remember my father on the high holidays, he was not too religious. My mother came from a kosher home, but my father was my father also had been in the war, in the German army, World War I. He and his brother and on my mother's side, another uncle, all served. My father was wounded several times, fought for the full 4 years, earned the Iron Cross. My uncle also earned the Iron Cross. And you know what happened, and I'll tell you what happened to those people later on. Anyhow, I went to a public school nearby, till the 4th grade, I guess it was. Well, I was 9 or 10, and then the new laws came out in 1933-34, and all Jewish kids had to leave public school, and so there was a building left for the Jewish community in the center of town, and I could walk there in a half hour, and that was I went to a Jewish day school. Now, in the meantime,
anti-Semitism coming up?
there were only 3 Jewish kids in my school. One of the boys was haunted quite a bit, chided, dirty Jew and all that. Somehow they always left me alone. I was a good, clean kid who stayed away, was skinny little strapling, and good to be. Somehow left me. The only problem was that in school, the religion was part of the course, and so I would come an hour later, to the school. And I remember one time I did come on time, and they claimed I didn't. So the principal used his washstock, his stick, and I got a good whipping for being late, which I actually wasn't. Sort of an indirect punishment. But after I left the Bürgerschule 47, that was the name, they had it by numbers like in New York City. I went to this Jewish school for, I guess, must have been a year. We had very good teachers. I was an average student, although I excelled in mathematics and social studies. And very good in gym. I was, out of 30, 40 kids, I was number 2. In gymnastics stuff, catching ball. I didn't know this because I was a sibling. What happened was my mother had 2 miscarriages. In those days, because of Hitler, the Jews limited. Later, when I came to the United States, there were 6 of us. 5 of us were only children. That was very common later on because of the nature of the economics and the persecution. Then my father, who was a very successful grain merchant, he started cooperatives. He actually went to the farmers. After all, he was in the war, he was an intelligent man, and he got these farmers together to buy as a group. And these cooperatives would buy from him, the merchant, the fertilizer, to the tune of whole trainloads. a lot of American corn that was fed to cattle over there, grains and seeds. As a child, I remember all the seeds that he would bring. But again, he didn't come home Friday night, and I saw him an hour or so Saturday he went to the office, and then maybe Sunday we took a tour as a family. Anyhow, I'm now about 10 years old. By this time, my father was seen with 2 Christians. Now the new law came that a Christian could not deal with a Jew. So these 2 people were arrested, and my father went underground. In other words, he lived in Hanover, but he stayed with different families. And when the Gestapo, the SS, the secret police came to out my mother, he wasn't there. He didn't do anything wrong, but that was just the thing they did in those days. This was probably around 1936. I was this was 10 or 10 and a half. So he decided to go to Italy. Mussolini had made a deal with Hitler, so there was an interchange. It was easy to get out of Germany to Italy, no place else but to Italy, and you could take money out. He sold second mortgages, whatever money we had, and he left my mother and myself behind, and he went to Italy. His brother and family, wife and son came, and his sister. They went to Italy and opened up a little hotel, which eventually went bankrupt after 1 year in 1938. Now, while he was on his way to Italy, he took me along to Stuttgart to an orphanage. And I was put in an orphanage because what happened was shortly before, my mother said, visit some friends for a day. So I visited my friends, and during that day they had an auction, and everything we had, including my toys, my books, my personal belongings, the apartment was empty. And I lived on a porch for a few weeks until I went to, so I did keep a couple of books, the Cooper leather stockings I had, and Karl May. There were a couple of, he was a German writer about cowboys, and I kept those books. And also I had the theater puppets, hand puppets, with the theater. Well, I had 35 different puppets, and my mother, after the auction, she gave me 3 or 4, a king, I think, a queen, a crocodile, and a pawn. But so that was the end of that. It was kind of a shock that I didn't realize the shock till now, 80 years later, but it must have been a shock at the time.
Did you save any poetry books? I know that you was probably your hobby. Is that when you picked?
No, the hobby. Yeah, my mother took me to. We had little puppet theaters. We went to the puppet theater, and I was enamored with that. And my mother also. Most German Jews knew operetta. They could sing songs. They could recite in the home. That was very common. That a bunch of people visit, and this one would recite Goethe, and this one read Schiller, and this Heinrich Heine. These were the great poets, and it was amazing when these got together. One person played piano, and they would sing the songs of the day from the musicals, the operettas from Berlin. Because Berlin had a very rich Jewish community, which with a lot of theater. The same people went to Hollywood later. No, so I grew up in that kind of atmosphere, but not in my home. My father was like a guy. He was not in the persona. He wasn't quite. Not only that, when my mother wanted me to take lessons in music and stuff, he said, if you do that, he's going to be a sissy. I don't want him to do that. It was the old thing. A boy has to be, treat him hard. But he wasn't around to do it. So anyhow, so now I get to Esslingen when I'm 10, and of course I was homesick.
36, I mean,
36. Yeah, I'm 10 years old now, right? 36, and I'm there for 6 months. I didn't know how long, and the reason for it is we already applied to come to the United States. We heard, my mother, and I didn't know this, heard about that you can send the kids ahead of time. They would stay with different families. Jewish Federation would take care of them. And I would be lucky enough to be one of those kids. There's one problem. There's a quota. I think it's about 18,000 people a year. And this is a time of 37 where and discrimination in Germany was all extremes. You know, doctors couldn't be a hospital, lawyers couldn't practice, judges, businesses were completely destroyed. So everyone wanted to leave, but the countries, except for maybe Palestine, there was no place to go, and you had to get an affidavit. So we got the affidavit, and she signed me up for this thing in 1936, figuring I'd go 6 months to an orphanage and then go to the United States. Well, I got the letter finally after 6 months. In the orphanage, we had a regular day school. We had about 80 kids aged 4 to 14. And that's the first time I experienced some sense of freedom. Because what happened, we were up in the castle high up in the hill, and the boys, 8 or 10 boys, you know, aged 10, 12 years old, would go down in town, and if anybody called them dirty Jew, they were ready to beat him up. So one time this happened, I wasn't participating, and then the police came to the principal of the school and chewed him out, that you Jewish kids have no right to judge those poor Christian kids who are beating up Jews all over Germany. Anyhow, I got notice, so here I'm very excited, you know, and I did okay at the orphanage. One thing they did, you had to study the Bible, and I just didn't know vocabulary. Somewhere in my memory, you have to learn how. The kids actually could translate passage for passage, and I didn't have the vocabulary background. So, but other than that, I kept up with everybody else, and then we slept about 8 to a room, and of course I was homesick as hell in the beginning and adjusted to it. The food was fairly decent, although we often went a little bit hungry. And then Friday evenings we got special meals. So it's not being on vacation. Vacation is 2-3 weeks. This was 6 long months, you know, and the only thing I could packages was food from my mother, and that was it. I don't think I ever got, not once did I get a letter from my father. My father was very literate, but I never got this. I saw a letter from my father. So now they brought me to the train, express train. It's like being in New York to California, except in mental and distances. So I brought me to the train in Stuttgart, in the express train that makes so many stops, and then after 6 hours I would have transferred the train to Hanover. My mother was waiting in Hanover. In those days it was safe for a kid to go by himself. So now I'm about 10 and a half, and not quite 11, and the first stop at the express stop, I get out of the train for a minute and look, and you know, you sit in your passenger compartments. I just was a little kid walked around, so I look into the train as this man looking out the window at me, and so I looked, and I guess I made a grimace. Anyhow, he rushed out of the train, grabbed me. I said, "Are you a Jew?" And I said, "Yes." And so I said, "How come you stuck your tongue out at me, you terrible," and so on. And he tried to call the police because I'm not kidding. So
did you stick your tongue out?
Hell no, I was a goody kid. I never, even in the army, I never got in the I never, of course, well, you know, to make a certain it's kind of stupid for a kid to do that anyhow, even though he didn't have a uniform. He had a little button with a swastika on it. So then they called the police, but the train had to leave, so they kicked everybody out of the apartment. They sealed the apartment up and kept me by myself. Then the train made a special stop at the next place, and the police came again and investigated. I said, "I didn't do anything." I was crying, of course. You're a 10-year-old kid. "Oh yeah, you did this and that." And then there was a rule in the Germans are very strict with their rules, that if you're passing on the train, you got a ticket, you can't take you off. There was not enough reason to arrest me or anything, so they left me in the compartment by myself. But after about 2 hours of that, they opened it up with other people, because I was scared what would happen to my mother. Yeah. So anyhow, 5 hours later, there was a rule, they had to give me the tickets back. I switched all by myself. 10 and a half years old. I'm thinking about it now, but the experience, I can still feel the pain. And then I met my mother, and I said, oh, I did something terrible, and so on. And I said, I didn't do it. Anyhow, next morning we went to the police in Hanover and reported it. They knew nothing about it and never heard anything. But from that point on...
But they knew you were Jewish.
Pardon me? Oh yeah, of course. You had to report anyway if somebody moves around. And you know, or especially in a police state like Germany. Now it's 1936 and a half, something like that. And for the next year and a half before I went to the United States, every time they marched with the German flag or a policeman came, I was hiding. that fear complex was sets in self-preservation.
Where did you hide?
Oh, and doors, apartment buildings and doors, corners. Just make sure, you know, you can, don't forget, I'm still only a skinny kid of maybe 90, 100 pounds. But the general feeling, and also I experienced even as a child in Hanover, before our apartment was auctioned off, everybody only had one radio. You could not listen to, if you listened to foreign radio, you could be arrested. And listening to radio every night in the news, whatever news when the Jews stole, the Jews cheats here, the Jew, all the Jews, they named them by names, and so you begin to have that propaganda. Then you go out on the street, on the block, there's a big baseboard with a newspaper called the Stürmer, very anti-Semitic paper, with cartoons against the Jews. Judas is, you see that. Then you walk down the street, there used to be a small, like a Woolworth store. The windows were smashed in. Jews owned it. That's out of business. Then you hear indirectly from this one left, this one was arrested. And this general tone and the fact that my father himself had to escape, you get this funny feeling that on the one hand this is your country, your language, your place. On the other hand, you're supposed to be inferior. And you kind of fight this inferior, you know. And well, the fact is Jews in those days were not known to be farmers. Jews were not known to be great athletes, although they were, you know. Yeah. And we were very, very meek, besides everybody else was very submissive. You know, the mass arrests had taken place, which I didn't know about. I mean, Hitler killed his own people by the hundreds. So now I waited a year, almost a year and a half.
This time you were with your family?
This time, no, my father was in Italy, he never came there.
Your mother?
I was with my mother, and we had a very good older couple. Their son died in World War I, Jewish couple, and they had a porch. I stayed on the porch, and they had a room for my mother, and waited almost a year and a half before the notice came. And during that time, I was tutored. I still had two friends on the other side of town, and we did a lot of walking, took the bus, and I stayed in touch. We also had a Jewish organization equal to the Boy Scouts, since Jewish kids couldn't come to the regular Scouts. It's called Bund Deutsche Juden, the youth group, and where we did weekend hikes. Every weekend we would hike. Of course, we had to tell the police we were hiking. So this sort of helped a great deal. Also, earlier when I was 6 or 7, my mother sent me either to summer camp for a week or two, or some trip. One week I spent a week on the farm where I broke my arm. I jumped off a little barn and broke my arm. And another time she sent me to an island called Norderney in the North Sea. It was a resort, and Jewish kids would get there, and I stayed there 3 weeks. So I had several vacations. We also visited my grandfather several times. We had to go to Berlin all the way up to Poland, to Königsberg, which is in East Prussia. So I got a little bit of traveling experience, but nothing excessive. I had 2 friends, one Jewish friends, Justus Schleissner, and the other thing, as I said, and I loved the bugs and animals. I'd catch the snails we'd catch a lot of snails. We'd put them in the box or something, take them home, and scare my mother to death. But anyhow, then the notice came. I think we had to go to Hamburg or Berlin to the American consulate before, the 2 years before. Now we had to go one more time to show you I'm still alive. And then my mother brought me to the boat, and there were about 13, 14 other kids. There was a chaplain. Now every second cruise line had to be German. In other words, you could take a ship, an American ship, a German ship, and the ship was New York, was run by the Habak, the German line. So I'm very excited, because of food with the other kids, 14 of us, and so the second or third day, I'm in the ship, and the little kids, I go downstairs for the coolers, and I see this bulletin board, this anti-Nazi, anti-Jewish thing, and the rest of the trip, I wasn't free. When I got off the board back in New York and looked back, even then I didn't feel free. I think this feeling of being a prisoner, so to speak, stays with you for a long time.
Okay. I want to back up just a little.
Yeah.
Did you know, I was wondering what was happening with your extended families. Did you know about, did you have any idea?
Oh, well, yeah.
Where they were and what was happening?
It's amazing. Then and all throughout, even during the war in the Red Cross, we always corresponded. Even in the concentration camps, we were able to communicate through the Red Cross in different ways. We were able to. My mother was able to correspond with my father in Italy because that was easy enough. And what you do, we send them coupons where you take the coupon and you get a free postage. They sent 100 of those and would give him money to do things with. And while he was in, not in Milan, and Torino, and Turin and so on, the Jewish community helped him, his brother's wife, and their son who was my age, Herbert. And they all sort of the form stuck together, and he was selling light bulbs. Don't know how much Italian he knew. And the bulbs that guaranteed for 4 years and then never die. Anyhow, that's how they made their living somehow they made their living. Now, my grandfather was still alive. He went to homes. He was being blind in Berlin at that time. My aunt, my mother's sister, who was married to a high executive, not Jewish, an insurance man. So 1937, said the Nazis told him, look, as long as you're married to the Jew, you're going to lose your job, your position. So they were very much in love. They'd been married 10 years, so they had a divorce, an artificial divorce, and figured when the whole thing is over, they get married again. So now she and my mother's brother, who was a designer, clothing designer, very, very brilliant, had office all over, decided to stay with his sister. They went to Holland, and then somewhere in between 1940, when the Nazis came in, they got lost. And I don't know what happened to them. They probably went to Auschwitz or one of those places, concentration camps, and got lost. So that we know that. My mother herself came a year after I came. Now I'm in the United States, and the first thing I found out to a very nice family. The guy was with Chicago political machine. He was a precinct captain and worked for the city. There are thousands of them. But his main job was to get all the people, 250 voters, to vote him Democratic. And that's how they did it. Do favors, parking tickets, they fixed that, get you jobs, and that was his main job. But they didn't have much money, so the Jewish Family Service gave him, I think, $25 a month. And in the meantime, he also had a son my age, so I slept with the son. But when the son and so on did nothing, I already started to get a newspaper out, and I started to sell a magazine. And not only that, when I was on the ship before I came, by the time I got off the ship, don't ask me how, I had already 8 pennies. 2 Indian pennies, 6 others, some other. And I spoke better English than anybody in the 15. With my mother, during the year and a half, no school, she had a tutor, and I had enough in tutoring for some reason. So that helped a great deal.
What other languages did you speak when you were growing up?
That's all, German and, yeah, of course.
No Yiddish.
No, German speaker people, Yiddish is about 80% German, so 70%. So anybody who speaks German can understand Yiddish. I don't speak it, you can learn it quickly, but you can understand 90% of it. You know, that's because actually Yiddish is the old German of the 16th century, like Shakespeare's English. That has changed, make it modern. But Yiddish was the old German, actually, that stayed with the people, and then the German self-modernized. You know, matter of fact, Goethe, unlike Shakespeare, the great, around 1800, the great German poet, is very modern. You can read Goethe today like it was yesterday, whereas Shakespeare is much more difficult, you know, the writing, because he came 15th and 16th century. Anyhow, in New York, they gave us a fabulous, this was like a vacation, took us on the Empire, not the Empire State was clouded that day, they took us to the Rockefeller Center, 70 stories up in 50 seconds. Here's this kid from Hanover, you know, all of us. And then they took us to the Statue of Liberty. They even let us go in the Arm. In those days, you could walk all the way into the Arm. And we went to Rockefeller Center, Rockettes. We saw the Rockettes, stayed in a hotel for 2 or 3 days. Wow. And that was an amazing experience for a 12-year-old boy. I'm 12 years old now. It was in August of 1938. And then a bunch of us, a lot of kids stayed in New Jersey, New York, and so area. A bunch of us, some went to Texas, some went to San Francisco, and I went to Chicago. I think 3 of us ended up in Chicago. And they're still living here, still living today, which is amazing since, no, it's 2012 versus 1938, you know, 74 years later. And I had a young aunt in Chicago, which kind of nice. I saw her once a week for dinner or so on. She was making 17. She was the assistant editor of a German paper, just a secretary actually. You know, she was in her 20s, mid 26, very liberal, very. I don't know, she was not a communist, but very socialist. It was very common in those days. Anyhow, she'd come earlier, 2 years earlier. So then they put me in elementary school. I probably should have been in 6th grade. I think they put me in the 4th grade. And then a few months later, they moved me to the 5th grade. And then eventually, I caught up to, you know, the 8th grade.
What school was that?
Well, the later Lake, I think it was Lemoyne was one of the schools, elementary school. In those days, Chicago today too had 8 years of elementary, 4 years high school, just two schools. So then there was a sub-school after high school called Lakeview, where Charlie McCarthy went, by the way. Edgar Bergen went to that school. And then from that school, I transferred over. There was an opportunity to this technical high school called Lane Technical, because it's a feeder school, and we had 14,000 boys. 14,000 boys at the time.
I think it was on Western Avenue.
Pardon me?
I think Lane was on Western Avenue.
Exactly. Right next to Riverview Park. There still was Riverview Park in those days. Yeah. And, you know, I took streetcars and walked. Matter of fact, I didn't have a car till I was 24 years old, which in a way was good because, you know, you learned more time to read. Then I went.
Where was your mother?
Oh, okay. Now, Crystal Night came in 39 November, and I missed it by a few months. My mother got caught in it. Of all the times she visited my father's family, They had a butcher shop and a sausage factory and make ice in a smaller town called Michigan, about 3 hours by train. When my mother went there to visit that particular day, what they did is the Nazis would take the kids from one town, because otherwise they knew each other, and send them to the other town and tell them the Jewish homes. They went into this home, which smashed everything, scared the women, arrested my uncle, who was a heavy-set man, but he was really one of the most successful people in town, because a 3-story building, you had 30 people working in a sausage factory, plus a large butcher shop. And he was arrested, and the women tore the dishes and defecated, did all kinds of stuff, to nauseate you. And what I didn't know till a few years later, recently, that one of my cousins, there were 3 boys, one of them hid out in the attic. And so he missed them. The other 2, I don't know what happened there at that time. Anyhow, one ended up later on in Brazil and married a Brazilian gal and just died a few years ago. And the other one went to Argentina and with his young wife, and then got divorced and came to the United States around 1950, got remarried and had 3 kids. And I saw him quite often. Later on. There wasn't much family, but there were 3 or 4 cousins still alive, because I was the only sibling. So I went to technical courses, college preparatory courses, and I graduated on top of 10th of my class, which I'm still amazed at, because right after school I went to work, where other kids are into mules and sports. I walked by, we lived yes, and let me retract. My mother then was able to get on an affidavit to my sister. She came 1 year later and lived in a little apartment, but Jewish Family Service now got us a 3-bedroom apartment. So my aunt moved in, my mother moved in, and it was a very small apartment, 3 bedrooms, in a safe neighborhood, not a rich neighborhood, but safe neighborhood. And I was a roach killer. We were in the apartment. It was the kitchen. You put the lights on at night. The stinks were crawling all over. Anyhow, I learned by taking powder in certain places all over the place. Within 3 days, we got rid of all the roaches. And then they leave the powder for the eggs. So, because it's very common back east to have roaches. In Germany, we had bed bugs, but there we had roaches.
Roaches are pretty good size.
Oh yeah, they're intelligent too. They move fast. I tell you, they move fast. Although they don't do any harm. Anyhow, so I had. Did I have my own room? No, I had a porch again. I lived on a porch. 3 times in my life I ended up on a porch, because the extra bedroom we rented out to my cousin from Chicago. He paid $7 a week, and we lost money like mad, because he got food for room and board. And he was a husky, 200 and some year, and he ate so much. But he was family. So then we rented another room out to a lady who's still alive. She's now in San Francisco. She got married a couple of times. Marian Nita is her name. And all I remember basically, I had a lot of influence. My aunt was, as I said, by this time maybe 30. I'm 13, 14, and she was very influential. I disagreed with her politically-wise. I was middle of the road, even in those days. I kept up with all the war stuff with Hitler. I had a big map on my porch side there, one of those poster boards, yeah. And then I had little flags. The newspaper had it every day. I put a flag in this as the German army moved toward Russia and so on. So in Germany as a kid at 9 years old, I collected stamps. And so I was it was common in those days, familiar with countries all over the world. Not only countries, but the stamps teach you who the leader is, the king is, and so on. So when it came to that stuff, I was way ahead of almost all the kids. So when I finished, while I was in high school, I did about 2 or 3 different jobs. I remember I was always working, and one was.
Did you have time for writing poetry at that time, or was?
Oddly enough, that's a good question. No, what happened was I started writing letters to the editor. The Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times was just a new paper, and the Chicago Tribune on Sundays, I have a whole scrapbook of letters to the editor, and they published a lot of them. Then they had a special column, believe it or not, of rhymes, poetry, and I got about 4 or 5 of those printed, and not no money, but the ego of it. And then I stopped for 70 years and started after about 70 years. 65 years later, I started all over again. I always wanted to write, I was too busy doing it, although I wrote a couple of plays as a school teacher. Anyhow, from then I went to the Army. No, there was a show with a film company was selling film downtown Chicago, still there. I worked for them. Oh, I worked for a factory. I got a job in the factory. I was still going to high school. And at nighttime I got a job in the defense for them at turrets. And I was skinny kids. I had to lift big plates on a machine, stamp machine, boom. I didn't do too well, but I was there for 4 or 5 months. And what I did is, I told Jewish Family Service, because I was with the 3rd family this time. I said, forget it. And I got a room in a rooming house, and for $3.50 a week, I had a little hot plate, and I was able to take care of myself. Yeah. Anyhow, so then I worked for, what's the name of it? Central Camera Company. Central Camera. They're still there. It's a Jewish kind of Jewish. I worked upstairs filling orders. So then I got my letters, Uncle Sam, greetings. So I had to go to the Army. So they said, I had to go to Milwaukee, Wisconsin because I got busy to be sworn in, inspected the physical and all that stuff. So I took the train to Milwaukee, and they asked me, do you want to go right now or you want 3 weeks? I said, I want 3 weeks. So I had 3 more weeks to goof off. I gave my mother some personal stuff to put away, whatever you had, a couple of boxes. And then I went in the Army, and
that was what year?
This would be in 1943, and I went to Fort Benning for basic training, 10 weeks. Fort Benning, believe it or not, in those days had 100,000 soldiers at one time. Can you imagine? What people don't know, our population in those days was 150 million. Of the 150 million, 15 million eventually were in service. The wax and waves, 500,000, but mostly men. Army, Navy, Merchant Marine, Air Force, and so on. It's unbelievable, the war effort. That was a true war. It was a war of survival. Sure. So then didn't ask for it. I was 18 years old. They put me in the Combat Engineers. Now, I don't know what the Combat Engineers, it's a work battalion, that's all. It's a nice name, but basically you're a labor battalion. We specialize in minefields. And minefields means that when the Army moves ahead, before the infantry, you go out there and pick up mines. And when the Army retreats, you're the last one, you put the mines out in the field. But we also specialize in bridges. And we went to Fort Smith, Arkansas later. First I was in North Carolina, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I think it was attached to the 81st Army, but they pulled us out. And the reason for it is I signed up for a A12 program. The A12 program was, before I would go into fighting, I would go to college and also at the Army. I had to take certain tests, and I passed the test. And I was in that program. There were 20 of us. at this camp. There's only one problem. All of a sudden, right in the middle of this program, right when we finished with Fort Benning, they decided to break it up. It took 100,000 students out of colleges, 100,000, and put them right in the regular army. And so we had 180 men. We had 20 of us young people who were going to go to college, never did. And 160 guys from the Ozarks who were chewing tobacco, real rough guys, didn't even have high school. They mixed us. And I was with the outfit for about a year and a half, same outfit. And we trained, we put a bridge across the Arkansas River, which is a really heavy river. It's Fort Smith. And you get home a couple of times. But I never liked the Army, but I adjusted, you know, because I was brought up sort of free spirit. But stayed out of trouble. And besides, they only paid us $30 a month. You couldn't get in trouble then, no money to get in trouble with. So, then fortunately enough, we are ready to go overseas. Now, I had two interesting experiences. One was, before we went overseas, this is in '44 now, the war's going on. Since I'm not a citizen yet, you know, I came to the United States, my green card, they didn't tell me anything. So one day, the sergeant says, get dressed in your ODs in your regular uniform, you know, and put me in a jeep. We went into town, 30 miles into Fort Smith, and in the building, a bunch of people there. And I said, raise your hand. I said, who's the president? He said, Roosevelt. Raise your hand. And then when it was finished, the sergeant said, congratulations, now you're a citizen. He never even told me. Oh, that's how I became a citizen. Didn't even know what was happening to me. And then now, a few weeks later, I get my new dog tags. You know, everybody has dog blood type and name in case you get wounded, so they know what to do. So I look at the dog tags, and it's P. P is Protestant. So we had 180 men, so I went to the first sergeant who barely knew me, and but he knew enough about me. And I said, they made a mistake. I'm Jewish. You usually put H, Hebrew for Jew. Yeah. He said, you're Jewish? Well, you smoke, you drink, you gamble, you're German. How could you be Jewish? And that was all the attitude. We had about 3 Jews in the company. We didn't have any cemetery because they didn't know what it was. They didn't even know who Jews were, you know. But while I was there the first year, they put me in orientation. I was in charge of 180 men for 1 hour, and I had to talk about Germany. In those days, I was 18. I still remembered a lot of my childhood, you know, and experience, and they wanted to know. So all these guys sitting there, and here I'm talking. This is, I think, how I got into teaching American history later on. So, you want to continue?
Okay, ready.
Well, so I'm now in the American Army. We trained for the Rhine crossing. You know, the D-Day was just about finished. I was still in the United States during D-Day, and we all specialized in minefields, which means we are the last people to leave and pick up the mines, or the first ones to put them down when we retreated. Anyhow, we also specialize in Bailey bridges, which means you take an average river, you know, of several hundred feet, and you use boats, and you put the pieces together, and within 4 or 5 hours, you can build a bridge so a tank could go over. And that was our specialty. So we did it at the Arkansas River in summertime. It was very hot. I'll never forget that. So now we ended up in New York, New Jersey. I'll never forget this. We had special barges, boats that would take us to the ship. Now the flotilla would leave because of German U-boats late at night, you know, midnight. So all our troops with our uniforms and with our baggage, you know, stuff, got on this by a boat, a small ship to go to the big ship, and there was this big sign, "Is this trip really necessary?" Because in those days, you know, you don't talk to anybody. Anyhow, it took us 9 days from there, and we went to Southampton, not Southampton, I'm sorry, to Liverpool. It was very cold. It was late in 40, must have been 44, because it September, October 44. And right away we got tea and milk. Now, we aren't used to the tea and milk, but it's amazing. After being in England later, 4 months, we all loved it, you know. And we trained again in the Midlands near Shrewsbury, again for bridges. From there, they moved us to near Oxford. And every morning we would take our trucks out and we would put a bridge across the Thames River. It's very small in that area, you know, from Oxford, outside London. We put a bridge up, ran across, a tank across, and we pull down the whole bridge, all the pieces, load them up again, always for the Rhine crossing. Then what happened now, the Remagen Bridge, which was supposed to be dynamited, some of the ammunition didn't blow up. And so the United States was able to save that bridge. The German engineers were not able to destroy it. So all of a sudden, the whole American army started to go across that bridge psychologically. And then we had pontoons and other ways and several other bridges. Before you knew it, a tremendous amount of the 1st and 3rd Army went across the Rhine into Germany. So when this happened, there was a new weapon that had developed called the V1. It was sort of an airplane with a ton of ammunition that shoot it up from France, I believe, and then when it hit over Antwerp or it hit over London, and London's a big city, the motor would stop and the damn thing would drop down and have a bomb. So it's called the V1s. Now, when the bomb hit, it destroyed a lot of property, and the English soldiers had been gone for 5 years. So they asked the combat engineer, that was our job, we were really a labor battalion, to come the next morning to clean up the damage. And the damage came from the concussions. You might only hit one house, but the bricks and everything would destroy the whole area. Now, hundreds of these bombs would come. Every night you would hear boom, 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 boom. And usually we had the balloons, thousands of balloons, huge balloons to stop the planes. Then the British Spitfire, the British planes would chase these rockets and they shoot them down. However, quite a few bombs came down. That wasn't bad. Now it's coming October, November of 1944, and the Germans, Hitler, developed a new secret weapon. This is the V2s. The V2s now are straight rockets, straight up. They came from Holland, and then they came on London. Hundreds and hundreds of them, several thousands. By the time it was all finished, and our job was, again, to clean up the mess. But the lucky part is they moved us several times. They moved us in a square called, in South Kensington, where we cleaned up the damage, a row of houses in the whole square. We had our supplies in the middle of the square, a little park in the middle that we controlled. And we stayed there, believable, for 3 months. It's the best time of my life because I could walk to Kingsbridge and Piccadilly Circus in a half hour in the center of London. Now everything was darkened out at night, you know, it was blackout. But there were dance halls going 7. The theater was still going on with the Noel Coward and Terence Reddick and the plays in those days. There was the Opera House, Covent Garden. They took the seats out and made a dance hall, 2,000-3,000. And there were so many women that every third set of dances, the women cut in on the men. And I learned how to dance. I picked up a couple of gals. I never physically got too deeply involved, but at least, you know, I was a little shy, a little untrained like some of the guys, but they went drinking and I went to theater. So for me it was a fantastic. Oh, and then not only that, I'm there one day and I'm supposed to be fighting in the fronts of near Germany, and I'm here in London. And I go to the phone booth there and look for Irma, my mother had two first cousins there. So I called up, and I called the first one and said, I saw him in the phone book. He said, what are you doing in London? So I explained to him. So 3 days later, I had dinner at their house, which was quite an interesting sideline experience. Both women were, one was married to an airplane, to a pilot, sort of not a happy marriage, and the other one had a boyfriend and so on. But that was probably the best experience in my life. From there, we went on to Le Havre, and before we boarded there always a flotilla because of the submarines at nighttime. You know, we went across the canal from Weymouth, in this case, up to Le Havre. And there were U-boats and anti-aircraft. Things were happening there. And by the way, in London, during the Boswell raid, people don't know it, 5,000 people were killed and 1 million homes. You can Google it now. 1 million homes were destroyed this is at the end of the war, toward the end of the war, end of 44, January 45, from this Boswell raid. And we were lucky. I mean, we heard them come down. A couple of times the buildings would shake, but thank God, no medals for that kind of stuff. But anyhow, we went then, stayed right out of Rouen, France for a while. They're big tent cities, 20, 30,000 people each, army. We stayed there for, I think, maybe a week or so, and then we toured past Paris, never got into Paris. We could see it from 10 miles away. And we went then up to Epernay, France, near Reims, the champagne center of the world. And the first night we didn't know this. For a pack of cigarettes, you can get a bottle of champagne. And everybody was soused drunk and had a great time. And we stayed in German. The Germans left a bunch of rooms, beds and so on, feather beds, straw beds. We stayed there for 3 weeks. And the thing is, when you drink champagne like this, and the next morning you drink water, you get drunk all over again. So it was quite an experience, unless you get sick. So we stayed in Epernay for 3 weeks. From there we moved on to Belgium, Liège, which is on the river there, Namur, and the barges would bring us supplies, and we, believe it or not, we supplied 10 million people, First, Third Army, plus when the war collapsed. The war wasn't over yet, but collapsed with tremendous supplies all along the river. The expense for the war, they didn't care. It was just, we were over-prepared by this time. And by this time also, Germany was almost ready to collapse. And then on May 6th, when the war was over, I was sort of a lonely guy walking around the streets downtown Liège. By the way, in Liège, a few weeks ago, some crazy guy shot a bunch of people there on the same square. But it was, then they sent me to, we were still there, they needed a clerk typist, so I was sent back to the Rouen.
Hold.